Toryism embodied in the Conservative Party has always had grave faults and vices, but it had certain redeeming virtues, which were skepticism, um, pragmatism, pessimism, and sheer common sense.
Mm.
And those are the qualities which have completely deserted the Tories over the last 10 years. And until they recover them, I don't think the party will ever get back into election winning mode. Well, the Tories have been undone by a series of events, including a Brexit, which is the subject that dare not speak its name. It's not going to, it's apparently there's a general agreement among, well, not the Lib Dems, but among the Tories and Labour that no one will even mention it during this far too lengthy election campaign, by the way. Within my memory, there was a dissolution of Parliament and the election took place 3 weeks later. I don't know why we have to have 6-week campaigns, but that is, by the way, I mean, it's hard to see the Tories recovering from their present position in the polls. So I remember that in 2015, the FT had a headline 4 days before the election saying Labour had a 5-point lead.
Mm.
And of course, the Tories won a clear majority. The Conservative Party has over 3.5 centuries. That's, you go back as far as the 17th century, we've had something called a Tory party. It obviously isn't the same thing in the reign of King Charles III as it was in the reign of King Charles II, and it's shown amazing adaptability over the years. It's accommodated itself to the enormous increase of the electorate, and it became a genuinely popular party in the 20th century.
Do you see a dramatic change that's happened though in the last in the last decade that sort of separates the Conservative Party of now from even the various different forms of the Conservative Party that existed beforehand?
Well, yes. I mean, it's not exactly a drastic change to the party, but the circumstances of politics have changed, and in a way unfavourable to the Tories. I mean, Mrs. Thatcher, whether people loved her or hated her, was a transformative prime minister. Her government was the last government in this country, in my view, that really changed the country, and the only one of two since the war. The other being the Attlee government. The Blair government, to a large extent, accepted the inheritance of Thatcher. And today, although there's going to be a great deal of vituperation between Tories and Labour, there's actually much less to choose between the two parties in terms of policy than there was in 1945 or 1979.
So I mean, the existential crisis that you're talking about, then, what is it, and
Well,
what caused it?
What it is that I think the proximate cause, well, actually, the proximate cause goes by the name of Boris Johnson. I mean, um, his career has been one of totally cynical opportunism. He backed Leave in the referendum in 2016, not expecting to win. And then found, as Dominic Law, in that case, in case it sounds that this is a view of mine, Dominic Lawson said the truth that everyone knows, that Boris Johnson never supported Brexit until he realized it was the only way he could become leader of the Conservative Party. So one of the most consequential changes in our recent history for many decades past, which is Brexit, was largely the work of a cynical opportunist who didn't believe in the cause.
And would you say that the cause of Brexit was unconservative, was not in keeping with the traditions of the Conservative Party up until that point, or would that be going too far?
Well, if you go back 50 years, the Tories were much more a Europhile party than Labour. It was Labour which was badly split in. At the time, Edward Heath took the country. It was a Tory Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, who tried to enter what was then the common market. It was another Tory, Edward Heath, who did in 1973. Harold Wilson had to hold a referendum when he came back to office to patch over the split within the Labour Party, and in the parliaments elected in 2010, 2015 and 2017, there was a majority of pro-Europeans or
Mm.
people who wished to remain in the European Union. What it meant was that, in my view, Mrs. Thatcher was right when she said that referendums are the device of dictators and demagogues, and you get a perverse outcome where Parliament had to enforce something that most MPs didn't believe in, and that affected the Tories much more than Labour because the Tories were in office.
Do you think then that, I mean, basically the shock of Brexit fundamentally changed the nature of the Conservative Party, or fundamentally changed the personnel at the heart of the Conservative Party? Where did this sort of existential crisis that you write
Well,
about, where do we see
existential.
its roots and its
Well, but
continuation?
what then happened? If you remember, first of all, Mrs. May called a second election in 2017, hoping to increase her majority, because it had led to an impasse. I didn't want to keep harping on about Brexit, but you see, what happened was a textbook demonstration that of the incompatibility of plebiscitary rule by referendum and parliamentary government. If you have a House of Commons of MPs obliged to put through a measure most of them don't believe in,
Mm.
then parliamentary government itself is in crisis. Anyway, the Mrs. May was stymied by Brexit, and finally she was overthrown by Johnson, who won the 2017 election, saw an enormous revival of Labour under Jeremy Corbyn, rather to my surprise, I must admit. But without trying to explain things away, all our politics since 2015 have been aberrant. I
Mm.
mean, the 2017 election was aberrant. It was the Labour vote was what the stock market calls dead cat bounce, and the 2019 election was aberrant. I know that they won, the Tories under Johnson won a majority, the biggest majority for more than 30 years. But even so, it was in very curious circumstances when the electorate was simply exhausted by the parliamentary impasse. And the impasse had got worse when Johnson
Yeah.
ruthlessly annihilated some of the very best people in the Conservative Party.
Is Rishi Sunak then? Is he a symptom of the Conservatives' crisis? Is he part of the cause of the Conservatives' crisis? Is he a potential cure to the Conservatives'
He's
crisis?
certainly not. He's certainly not a cure. I think he's, as you've just said, a symptom. I mean, remember, he wasn't actually what um, the party wanted. They chose, in as hard as it is to believe, in the summer of 2019, the Tories chose Liz
The
Truss,
Liz Truss.
and we all know what happened then.
Which of those two, though, would you say was more in keeping with what might have been the sort of traditional Conservative philosophy? Was Rishi Sunak more in keeping with
I
traditional
would say
philosophy?
Rishi Sunak rather. Liz Truss uh, belonged to a group of extreme right-wing libertarians.
Mm.
She had written this, been one of the authors of a book called Britannia Unchained in 2010, which included the words, "The British people are the worst idlers on earth." I thought that was probably not a sentence you would choose for a party manifesto at an election time.
What
Um, uh, but the Tories, you see, they've changed. I said that they keep adapting themselves. Rab Butler, who was the most important figure in the Conservative Party in the 50s and 60s, once said the Conservative Party has never believed in laissez-faire. Well, the answer is it sometimes has and sometimes hasn't.
mm.
But as part of its capacity for
What,
shape shifting.
but look, but before I let you go, what I mean, and in speaking of that shape shifting, and speaking of the
Mm,
Conservatives' crisis that one would expect is going to. I mean, it's certainly the polls all suggest it's about to hit them very badly in the current election. That crisis. What is the next shape shift? What do they do next? What in particular do you think of this idea that many Conservatives have that somebody like Nigel Farage could be the great saviour of the party? Is that fixing the party, or is that compounding the damage?
Nigel Farage is a most interesting man and in some ways a formidable figure. And he's quite entertaining to have lunch with, as I did once on behalf of the New York Times. The idea that he could take over the leadership of the Conservative Party is simply grotesque. and it would finish. That would finish the Tories forever.
Mm.
To have somebody who had been a relentless opponent and a very dangerous and disruptive opponent of the Tory party, um, suddenly,
Yeah.
many Tories would give up finally if
Well,
he were allowed to enter the party.
what are your before I let you go, what are your sort of your personal feelings about the state of the Conservative Party? Do you look at what the party has become over the last decade with a sense of loss, a sense of anger, a sense of frustration, a sense of despair? What do you feel?
All of those things.
Right.
Yeah, particularly despair. I mean, I think what has happened to them. It was a party like any other party, which you had many faults, but it had. I would put it like this: conservatism, and especially English Toryism embodied in the Conservative Party, has always had grave faults and vices, but it had certain redeeming virtues, which were skepticism, um, pragmatism, pessimism, and sheer common sense.
Mm,
And those are the qualities which have completely deserted the Tories over the last 10 years. And
mm.
until they recover them, I don't think the party will ever get back into election winning mode.
Thank you very much indeed, Geoffrey Wheatcroft. And Bloody Panico is out now, and you can order a copy at the timesbookshop.co.uk, where there is a special discount for Times Plus members.